Episode number 84, making the case. Which one's a better system, the barter system or capitalism? Let's get it. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Making the Case, episode number 84. We're inching closer and closer to episode 100. Glad you get to join us again. Appreciate the support and the love. In today's episode, we're talking about the barter system versus the capitalistic system that we are under to this day. Of course, I am your host, Dr. Jacob Isom, educator, author, speaker, entrepreneur, consultant, content creator, father, a little bit of everything. All right. Before we get into it, of course, we got to go over our two-channel norms. One, we'll take points and not people. Then two, we don't do all the cussing and derogatory stuff because we're professional over here. All right. And as you know, we're educational as well as a relationship channel. So, of course, we're going to go. I'm sorry, it was something flew across my face. Of course, we're going to go over educational topics as well as relationship topics. So, today's episode is one of those educational topics. Just something to inform you and get your juices flowing. All right. So let's get into our opening statement. Now, many of you are probably familiar with and heard, I'm assuming. Of course, I don't want to insult your intelligence. You've heard of the barter system. You understand that we live in a capitalistic society right now. But you may not be familiar with the different forms of currency. I know a lot of us have heard of crypto, and we know we're moving ever so close into the digital age. Really, we've been here for a while when we think about most of us, our paychecks are electronic, right? We don't even get physical paychecks anymore. So we've been in the digital age for quite some time. But when you're talking about investing with crypto and Bitcoin and things of that nature, that's fairly new, even though it's been around for the last few years, right? So when we talk about the barter system, we're going way, way back, right? A system that we used before we ever used paper currency, metals, or anything of that nature, bonds, or anything like that, right? Now, one could say that it was a system that was as probably fair as you can make it, right? Even though the value wasn't necessarily the fairest, but the exchange was pretty fair because you know what kind of agreement that you was getting into, right? If I have a cow, you need a cow, you have a horse, and I need a horse, we will exchange. Maybe that value is not fair. Maybe it is. Who knows? But it's fair in the sense that you have something I need, I have something you need, right? So the barter system can be looked at as something that is pretty fair for a lot of people's eyes, right? And if you ask me, I believe that we incrementally moved on to other different forms of currency, money. Well, it's a couple of different reasons, right? Well, one, when we have a society that is getting more and more advanced, right? When it comes to technology, invention, etc., right? So you need different forms of currency because it'll just be more difficult to barter in that essence. And two, in order to establish dominance over a group of people, whether that be race, gender, etc., right? Currency and money was a good way to pretty much keep someone down, right? So we know classes develop because of a monetary system, right? So with today's episode, what I'm going to do is we're going to break down what the barter system was. We're going to break down money, talk a little bit about different forms of currency, And we're gonna actually ask the question: is the barter system a good system to go back to, or are we kind of, stuck with the system that we currently have? All right. So I have three pieces of evidence for you today, of course. But the first piece of evidence, what we're going to do is we're going to be breaking down barter and money and different things of that nature, right? So let's get our education on. All right. So without further ado, let's get into our first piece of evidence, shall we? All right. So, well, my first piece of evidence, what we're going to do is we're going to be pretty much defining and coming to an understanding of what we mean when we talking about barter system and other systems of money and currency. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to break down and talk about what the barter system was, because we don't use the barter system anymore. I imagine some places across the world still do. But we know in the Western world, we definitely don't. So let's define it for those that need a little bit more clarification and understanding of what the barter system is. So, sorry. The barter, the direct exchange of goods or services without an intervening meaning of exchange or money, either according to established rates of exchange or by bargaining. And from my understanding, is mostly from bargaining, right? It is considered the oldest form of commerce, right? Trade. Barter is common among traditional societies, particularly in those communities with some developed form of market. Goods may be bartered within a group as well as between groups, although gift exchange probably accounts for most intra-group trade, particularly in small and relatively simple societies where barter and gift exchange coexist. The simple barter of ordinary household items or food is distinguished between ceremonial exchange, such as potlatch, which serve purposes other than purely economic ones. So I'm imagining that is cultural, right? So bartering can be seen as more of a cultural practice than anything. All right. Let's see what else we want to touch on. So now we're going to break down money, right? Um Actually, in my last book, I have a chapter that talk about our relationship with money, and I go into a lot of details with this. Sorry, I just had to do it. Shameless plug. Um, and I break down the historical aspect of money and how we kind of get to where we are today. So go check that out. JacobIsom.com. All right. So money. Oh, sorry. Let me get back up. All right. Here we go. Oh, stop it. Money, a commodity accepted by general consent as a medium of economic exchange, which most people agree that money is an agreed upon exchange for um pretty much the world over, right? Um it is the medium in which prices and values are expressed as currency. It circulates anonymously from person to person and country to country, and thus facilitating trade, and is the principal measure of wealth, right? So if you're wealthy, money is the thing is making you wealthy. Okay. The subject of money has fascinated people from the time of Aristotle to the present day. The piece of paper labeled $1, 10 euros, 100 yuan, or 1,000 yen is a little different as paper from a piece of the same size torn from a newspaper or magazine. Yet it will enable its bearers to command some measure of food, drink, clothing, and remain of good life while there is only fit to light the fire. What's the difference? The easy answer and the right one is that modern money is a social contrivance. People accept money as such because they know that others will. This common knowledge makes the pieces of paper valuable because everyone thinks they are, and everyone thinks they are because in his or her experience, money has always been accepted in exchange for valuable good as a service. So, why is money valuable? Because we all believe it is. We understand that money is a social construction. We understand how many times have you heard that money grow on trees? Right? It's paper. Even though we know that, we still attribute value to that paper, right? No different than gems, gold, silver, right? Minerals that we find, we attribute a certain value to it. All right. Put my what you call up. Let's see. Let's let's go on down. I'm gonna read some more stuff to you. Let's talk about the function of money. All right. The basic function of money is to enable buying to be separated from selling, thus permitting trade to take place without the so-called double coincidence of barter. In principle, credit could perform this function, but before extending credit, the seller will want to know about the prospects of repayment. That requires much more information about the buyer and imposes cost of information and verification that use of money avoids. Now, of course, we understand debit and credit is huge now, right? So at one point in time, people are a little fishy about, loaning money for repayment, right? Now it's just the mode of how we do things, right? From the rich down to the poor, we all have credit. Okay. Now those who are rich, of course, have a crazy limit. Those who are poor have a small limit. But at the end of the day, everybody dibble and dabble in credit. Let's see. If a person has something to sell and wants something else in return, the use of money avoids the need to search for someone able and willing to make the desired exchange of items. The person can sell the surplus item for general purchasing power, that is, money, to anyone who wants to buy it and then use the proceeds to buy the desired item from anyone who wants to sell it. The importance of this function of money is dramatically illustrated by the experience of Germany just after World War II, when paper money was rendered largely useless because of price controls that were enforced effectively by the American, French, and British armies of occupation. Money rapidly lost its value. So, yes, money loses value. We know what inflation is, we know what deflation is, right? Here in a little bit, I do want to touch on the gold standard and how important gold is. Um, People were unwilling to exchange real goods for Germany depreciating currency. They resorted to barter or to other incentives to produce. The country's economic output fell by half. Later, the German economic miracle that took root just after 1948 reflected in part of currency reform instituted by the occupation authorities that replaced depreciating money with money of stable value. And a lot of times during war, right, the government will create war bonds, right, in order to raise money for war. So the value of currency always fluctuate during war times. That's always been the case throughout history. Let's see. We're going Yeah, we're gonna go past that. Some other things that I want to touch on real quick. All right, there we go. Paper money. Experience has shown that carrying large quantity of gold, silver, and other metal to prove inconvenient and risk loss of theft. The first use of paper money occurred in China more than 1,000 years ago. By the late 18th to 19th century, paper money and banknotes had spread to other parts of the world. The bulk of the money in use came to consist not of actual gold or silver, but fiduciary money, promises to pay specified amounts of gold and silver. These promises were initially issued by an individual or company as banknotes as the transferable book entries that came to be called deposits. Right? So everybody heard of bank deposits before. Although depositing banknotes began as claims to gold or silver on deposit at a bank or with a merchant, this later changed. Knowing that everyone would not claim his or her balance at once, the bank or a merchant could issue more claims to gold and silver than an amount held in safekeeping. Bankers could then invest the difference or lend it at interest. And when interest came into play, it changed everything. It changed the game, man. I'm sorry, I lost my place. All right. In periods of distress, however, when borrowers did not repay their loans or in the case of oral issues, the banks could fail. We seen that happen in the Great Depression, right? The stock market crash. People were rushing to get their money out of the banks, which means the banks failed, right? Created a whole catastrophe. Gradually, governments assumed a supervisory role. They specify legal tender, defining a type of payment that legally discharges debt when offered to the creditor and that could be used to pay taxes. Government also set the weight and metallic composition of coins. Later, they replaced fiduciary paper money, promised to pay in gold and silver, with fiat paper money, which is what we have today, right? Which means that the paper money really doesn't have any value. That is, notes that are issued on the fiat of the sovereign government are specified to be so many dollar, pounds, or yen, etc., and are legal tender, but are not promises to pay something else. Uh, the first large scale issue of paper money in the Western country occurred in France in the early 18th century. Subsequently, the French Revolutionary government issued exactnats from 1789 to 1796, serving the American colonies and later the Continental Congress issued bills of credit that could be used in making payments. Yet these and other early experiments gave fiat money a deservedly bad name. The money was overissued and prices rose drastically until the money became worthless and was redeemed in metallic money or promised to pay metallic money as a small fraction of initial value. Let's see. I want to get the last thing I want to touch on is the gold standard. That's the last thing I want to touch on. The great gold discoveries in California and Australia in 1840s and 50s produced a temporary decline in the value of gold in terms of silver. This price change plus the dominance of Britain in international finance led to a widespread shift from silver standard to a gold standard. Germany adopting gold as its standard in 1871-73. And then just mentioned a whole bunch of other countries after that. By the 5 decades of the century, silver remained dominant only in the Far East, China in particular. Everywhere, the gold standard reigned. In the early 20th century was the great era of the international gold standard. Gold coins circulated in most of the world. Paper money was issued by private banks and by government, was convertible on demand to gold coins or gold bullion at an official price. While bank deposits were convertible into either gold coin or paper currency, that was itself convertible into gold. In a few countries, a minor variant prevailed, the so-called gold exchange standard, under which a country's reserve included not only gold, but also currencies of other countries that were convertible into gold. Currencies were exchanged at a fixed price into the currency of another country, usually the British pound sterling, that was self-convertible into gold. So what you saw was that, well, now, of course, that was when gold was backing up paper currency. We don't have that same luxury as of today, which is the reason why, the currency, the paper currency that is circulating, right, literally only has value because it's in circulation, right? What you see nowadays is you see digital currency really take over. Like most of your money is literally you can access from a phone, right? Which that tells you something about the value. Now, does it? All right. The prevalence of the gold standard meant that there was, in effect, a single world money called by different names in different countries. U.S. dollar, for example, was defined by 23.22 grains of pure gold. The British pound, etc. Right. Under such an international gold standard, the quantity of money in each country was determined by an adjustment process known as the price specie flow adjustment mechanism. This process, analyzed by 18th, 19th century economists such as David Hume, George Stuart Mill, Henry III, occurred as follows. We won't read that. The decline in the amount of gold will produce in turn a reduction in total amount of money because banks and government institutions, seeing their gold reserve decline, will want to protect themselves against further demand by reducing the claims against gold that was outstanding. This would tend to lower prices at home. The influx of gold abroad will have the opposite effect, increasing the
quantity of money there and raising prices. These adjustments will continue until the gold flow cease and was reserved. All right, that's all I want to rate. And not to mention bank robbery, because people knew that it was literally gold at banks, right? So I just wanted to make sure that we was kind of all on the same page when it comes to what the barter system is, money. Now we talk about the gold standard and things of that nature. So we're going to continue the conversation on whether the barter system is a better system for us versus the capitalist system that we're currently in. So let's get into our second piece of evidence. All right, so let me get into my second piece of evidence, and with this piece of evidence, we're going to um, get into more a little bit about the barter system to give you a little bit more of an understanding, kind of why we might have moved away from it. Well, not know why we might have moved away from it, why we did move away from it, right? So I have an article from. Actually, I'm not seeing. I'm not even seeing what the name of this platform is. Um, so the title of it is called "Ever Wonder Why the Barter System Ceased to Exist and When Money Came on the Scene." So let's get into it. Barter, a system more than 6,000 years old, is still prevalent in some parts of the world today. The invention of money didn't end the barter system; it just made it more streamlined. Barter works, but not as an alternative to money. It can be used along with money, yes, because it's already happening in a modernized fashion, right? I imagine that in the Western world, bartering is still a thing, but not as much as, of course, the exchange of money as a mode of exchange. So, um, there was a time many moons back when money didn't exist. People would just ask for things they desired and in return would pay the owner by giving away something of their own or provide a service equivalent to the value of the desired product. Barter, a system more than 600 years old, is still prevalent in some parts of the world today. But where did it all start? Why did it stop? Where did money come into the scene? And could it possibly replace money in today's time? And I think we all understand the answer to that question because at this point we're too greedy. Like I think one of the reasons why we moved away from the barter system is because we wanted to be better than other people. We wanted to distance ourselves from others. Like if we worked extremely hard, we want to show that, right? I think that's part of it. Now, it's not the only thing, but that's definitely part of it. The earliest account recorded for barter takes us all the way back to 6000 BC. It was never the only method of exchange of goods and services, mostly because it wasn't able to sustain itself. Barter would always be used to complement another economic system. At first, people used to barter livestock. Later, as agriculture became a more prevalent source of livelihood, people started bartering produce. Goods were exchanged for food, weapons, tea, spices, among other things. You saw the barter system all the time when we talk about Native Americans, when they came in contact with Europeans. Same with American Africans, right? So the barter system is just a natural system that happened particularly with people from different cultures, right? Because it's a language that everybody understand, and it's a form of fair exchange that everybody understand. Because you have to remember, even to this day, the currency exchange of currencies is different. In the last piece of evidence, I talked about the yen, the pound, right? The euro, the dollar bill, right? So there's a form of exchange that has to happen that is not equal. So, but bartering is more of a equal playing field. So, goods were exchanged. I already read that. Salt used to be traded in the barter system a lot in Mesopotamia and neighboring areas. In fact, salt was so valuable at one point of time that Roman soldiers' salary were paid with it. Now that's crazy. You learn something new every day, right? During the Middle Ages, Europeans would travel the world to barter their crafts and animals for silk and animal fur for silk and perfume. America did it for wheat and deer skin. The Great Depression in 1930 gave rise to the barter system again, mainly because nobody had money to pay for goods and services. Now that makes a lot of sense, right? I just got through mentioning the Great Depression. The invention of money didn't end the barter system, and just made it more streamlined. What many do not know is that the barter system is still very much around. No, not as a bribe. Barter nowadays isn't just restricted to individuals. From SBM, small and medium businesses, to large business, to multinational organizations. Even national governments are involved in the barter system quite regularly. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce and the GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, barter accounts for about 25 to 30% of all transactions worldwide. Now, that I did not know. Even when you think of bartering in the simple, when it comes to business, what they like to call B2B, right? So if you have a food service, and then you have another business that's doing something, right? So they're sending food, and then you'll do a service for them. Like it may be like marketing or something right there. That's bartering, right? So it makes sense why 25, 30%. It would be a little higher. I thought it would maybe be like 10 to 15%, but that's crazy right there. So why did it go out of vogue? For why did it go out of style? Even though it was one of the major modes of transaction, it had some major drawbacks. For starter, there was no way to officially assign a specific value to the goods and service being traded. So people could really get something very expensive in return for a couple of lemons, just for example. Which is a good point, and I think I mentioned that in my opening monologue. Is that I mean, it's really hard to when you talk about value. It's really hard to put a value on. Okay, I mean nowadays, like if you go to a grocery store, lemons cost this amount of money and grapes cost this and stuff like that. Nowadays, right, because we put a value on it. But back then, before we did, it was harder. It also depended heavily on whether people were actually willing to give away what the other person wanted. That makes sense as well. Let's say you want to trade a pair of shoes for a t-shirt, but the other person might not be willing to give away the t-shirt. This would very often create conflict. Lastly, there was the lack of the visibility. Let's say you have a car which you were willing to trade in return for a TV, which would not happen, but let's go along with the example. I'm sorry. See, I need to read further. So you have a car which you willing to trade in return for a TV, fridge, and a washing machine. I don't think the value is still there unless it's that car got 200,000 miles on it or something. Um, it was not always possible that you would be able to find one person who has all those three things you're looking for, but you can only give away one thing, your car, which definitely could be cut into three pieces. All the issues made people think of alternative, and then money was born. So that makes a lot of sense. And I can see why we slowly but surely moved away from the barter system because, yes, you could say it's some fairness in it, but you also say that, well, it's also based on the wants and the needs of people. And so the monetary system just made it sure that now I can go to a store, and Walmart is a perfect example. Places like Costco, Sam's Clubs, and things of that nature, where it's a one-stop shop where you can go and get a whole bunch of different goods, not only goods but services. So, with our ever evolving society, particularly when it came to agriculture and things of that nature, that the monetary system was just it was a need for the rapid pace that we was kind of moving in, particularly when we talk about the industrial revolution. All right. So that was my second piece of evidence. We're gonna move on to my last piece of evidence, which is a video that I got for you. So don't go nowhere. You feel me?
Was brought on by systems of currency. If we went back to the barter system, there are huge problems with the barter system for a modern society like that which we have in the United States and in so many countries around the world. First of all, is that people are generally working at an employer. So if you're going to barter for your labor, first of all, your employer would need to figure out how to give you all of the different things that you would need. Otherwise, it's very complicated. If your employer says, okay, here we're bartering all of your work for rice, and then you have to then take rice and exchange it for all of the different things you might want, that really might not work. And then the other issue is that the barter system would require sort of a general consensus as to how much a person's time is worth based on their skills. And then you also need to take into consideration as an employer the costs associated with the acquisition of the good which you provide in the barter for people's labor. You can very quickly see how it would get very, very complex. And then the other problem with going back to barter in a modern society like the one which we have in the United States is that for all of the problems that exist with money, right, which can be the inflationary and deflationary aspect of it, the ability for the Fed to print money that is not necessarily backed by real economic production, right? We understand all that. The great thing about money is that it is fungible, right? You have a central currency that can be exchanged for any number of goods and services. And if you eliminate that, you are changing the sort of ubiquity and fungibility of money. And then you have different goods which may trade with other items at different scales based on supply and demand, etc. Now, at the same time, when we think about how the value of money can change, you could say, well, listen, David, yeah, the value of rice as a unit of barter probably would also change in the same way that the value of money can change. But it's a drastically different situation. Money, the value of money fluctuates based on exchange rates and other factors, but it doesn't vary based on whether it's summer or winter, right? And heating oil as an item of barter, for example, would change drastically based on where in the season we are in places that get cold. So it presents a whole new set of challenges. So I think the answer here, Ray, is absolutely not. While it might appear as though we could resolve some currency issues if we were to go back to a barter system, it would bring on such a plethora of new issues that it absolutely does not make sense for modern societies. Will we see changes to what we consider the currency status quo in the United States over the next 50 or 100 years? We may well, particularly with the elimination of cash that is already happening in many modern countries. We may well see a very significant realignment of our relationship to currency. But going back to the barter system is not what I see as the solution. We have a terrific bonus show for you today. Make sure to sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. We will talk to you then.
All right, so there you have it, folks. That was my piece of evidence number 3, where I mean he pretty much explained why the bartering system won't work. And I was thinking, especially after looking at the fact that 20 to 25% of the bartering system is still alive. Here's the difference when it comes to dating, right? Follow my logic. So I believe when a man takes a woman out on a date, he's dating to have sex. And a lot of women understand that. So the date in exchange for sex is like the barter system. Follow me. All right. Now, when it comes to prostitution, call girls, even going to the strip club, that is capitalism at its finest, right? Direct exchange. So what I believe that we pretty much prefer a system that is more concise and more direct versus a barter system that can have some like what we doing here. Because the date to, using my analogy still, the date to having sex doesn't always happen, right? A lot of time it's just assumption that's happening, or a man that's just wishing or hoping that it would. Not he's taking his chance. That's the reason why men don't mind taking women out on expensive dates, first dates at that, and spending a certain amount of money because they're trying to have sex. That's the barter system at play. All right. I think it's a pretty good analogy. I don't know. You let me know. Tell me in the comments, please. But I mean, is capitalism a perfect system? Absolutely not. Right? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about consumerism. We're talking about buyers and sellers. And as I talked about in a previous show, when it came to breaking down the movie Baby Boy, we know that the buyers are the broke people playing catch up. The sellers are the millionaires. And I'm using that loosely, right? But the sellers are the ones that's making money. Those are the ones that's having the ability to get credit, and not only get credit, but also offer credit when they get to a certain level. So I think although the capitalism and the monetary system that we have now, even though we know it's not fair, it's fair enough because people feel like that they can get ahead with this current system. And there's no way of really getting ahead with bartering because it's more of a equal exchange. It's more of a, okay, I need this, want this type of situation. And we kind of on the same playing ground. Capitalism allows us, as I mentioned before, to be better than somebody. All right. It allows us to have different category, different classes. It allows us to shame people. It allows us to feel like we're doing something with our life, to feel like we have purpose. That's what capitalism allows us to do. That's what this monetary system is allowing us to do. Now, there's a lot of negativity that comes with that. There's a lot of violence that comes with that, crime that comes with that. But we're willing to live with that because it's high risk, high reward. It's exactly what it is. Right? All right. So that's going to do it for today's episode, man. Hopefully you learned something. I know I learned a lot. And that's why I do this because, I am an educator and I love to learn. So I love disseminating to my people. All right. As always, man, I appreciate you rocking with me, man. I do it for you, and I mean that real talk, man. Or I should say I do it for us. But hey, as always, man, I am you, you are me. Love always, love eternal. Remember, the worst thing you can do is lie to yourself. My link's gonna be in the description and all that good stuff. I believe we just made that case. If it was a case worth making. All right, deuces. One love.